Rain was falling in silver sheets, streaking across broken sidewalks, dripping from rusted gutters, turning every step into a splash of cold grit. Beneath the flickering street lamp, a shadow moved, slow, limping, ribs pressing against damp fur. The dog's head hung low, paws dragging as though the weight of the world had settled in her bones. People passed by without looking, hurrying into warm cars, neon-lit shops, the promise of somewhere dry. She lingered, trembling, eyes wide with hunger and fear, pausing only to sniff at a discarded wrapper before retreating again into the storm. And then a figure stopped. Just a stranger in a dark coat, umbrella trembling in the wind, eyes locking with hers as if pulled by something older than chance. For a suspended moment, the noise of the city fell away, and the world seemed to narrow to just two beings. One shivering in the gutter, the other frozen in indecision. That night, beneath the weight of rain and silence, a life-changing choice began to take root in the stranger's heart. The rain had been steady since dusk, a relentless curtain that blurred the edges of the city into a smear of color and noise. Headlights sliced through the downpour, reflecting off puddles that pooled in the uneven cracks of the street. The air carried the sharp tang of wet asphalt, of oil rising from the ground and mixing with the damp rot of litter clogging the drains. Every breath tasted metallic, heavy, as though the night itself was pressing down on anyone still wandering its broken sidewalks. From the shadow of a crumbling alley she appeared, thin, trembling, her fur plastered flat by the storm. Her paws slapped weakly against the waterlogged pavement, nails clicking faintly as she limped forward. Her ribs strained beneath her coat, each breath shallow, each movement a fight against exhaustion. She lowered her head toward a discarded takeout bag, its paper disintegrating into pulp, and nosed through the remnants. The smell was stale, the scraps long gone, but hunger doesn't care about dignity. She chewed the soggy paper before spitting it back into the gutter, her eyes clouded with the dull ache of defeat. The city, indifferent, pulsed around her. Cars roared past, spraying dirty water across the sidewalks. A group of teenagers ran beneath an awning, laughter echoing above the storm, their sneakers pounding like drums. A man with a briefcase adjusted his umbrella and stepped wide to avoid her, his polished shoes untouched by the puddle she stood in. No one saw her, not really. She was a moving shadow, just another stray blending into the city's forgettable corners. But inside her, a spark still flickered. When a horn blared nearby, she startled and scrambled back against the wall, her body shaking with instinctive fear. Her ears flattened, tail tucked tightly under her, but her eyes, those dark, wide eyes, still scanned the world as if searching for a single thread of kindness. The storm stung her skin, but it was the emptiness around her that hurt most. Hours might have passed like that, her drifting from one alley to another, her paws tracing invisible circles through the rain. To her, time was no longer measured in minutes or hours, but in the rhythm of survival: step, sniff, retreat, rest. The city blurred into a monotony of smells and sounds, overwhelming yet empty of comfort. The thunder that rolled through the distance might as well have been her heartbeat, slow and heavy, announcing only that she was still here. And then, beneath the flickering halo of a street lamp, something shifted. A figure slowed. Just a person, hood pulled over their head, an umbrella angled against the wind. Their pace faltered as their eyes landed on her. For a moment, nothing moved. The rain fell harder, pooling at their feet, dripping off the edge of the umbrella. She froze, breath caught in her chest, as though the world itself had stopped turning. Her legs trembled, poised between bolting into the darkness and staying rooted in place. The stranger's gaze lingered. Not the quick, dismissive glance of someone avoiding an inconvenience, but a steady, weighted look that carried something else: recognition, maybe, or the quiet ache of compassion breaking through. The dog shifted uneasily, her claws scraping against wet pavement, her chest rising and falling in short bursts. In her eyes, this was danger. She had learned what hands could do, how they could push, strike, throw. Trust was a language she no longer remembered. Yet the stranger didn't move closer. They simply stood there, the umbrella shaking faintly as the wind whipped through the street, and let the moment stretch. The dog's ears twitched. She blinked, uncertain, her body taut as a bowstring. Rain dripped from her whiskers, slid down the slope of her muzzle. pooled beneath her trembling paws. She turned her head slightly, ready to retreat into the shadows. But the stranger didn't shout, didn't wave their arms, didn't try to chase her away like so many others. Instead, there was stillness, an odd, quiet patience that settled over the storm. And in that fragile stillness, something cracked inside the stranger. Maybe it was the way her ribs pushed sharply against her skin, each breath rattling with effort. Maybe it was her eyes, too big for her face, wide with a mix of fear and pleading. Or maybe it was simply that the night was so unbearably cold and no creature deserved to face it alone. Whatever it was, the stranger felt the weight of a decision pressing down, heavy and immediate. They could turn, keep walking, let the city swallow her whole. Or they could stop, step closer, and let this one moment alter everything. The rain hammered down, 1,000 tiny drums against the umbrella. The dog shifted again, muscles trembling with the instinct to flee. The stranger inhaled sharply, the kind of breath one takes before plunging into water, before crossing a threshold. And then, without a word, they lowered the umbrella slightly, letting the rain strike their shoulders, their hair, their outstretched hand. It was not an order, not a demand, just an offering, a fragile, uncertain bridge laid across the chasm between fear and trust. The dog tilted her head, watching with narrowed eyes. The storm blurred the edges of the world, but in the space between them something sharpened. Not yet trust, not yet connection, but possibility. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, low and deep. The city pressed on, blind to the scene unfolding beneath a single street lamp. And there, on the wet pavement, two lives hovered at the edge of change, waiting for one small step to collapse the silence between them. The stranger's hand hovered in the air, rain running down their wrist, pooling at their fingertips before slipping away into the night. For a heartbeat, they stayed frozen, aware of the absurdity of it, a grown adult standing beneath a street lamp, offering their hand to a stray dog as though it could erase all the scars life had carved into her. The storm pressed harder, soaking through their coat, seeping cold against their skin, but the stranger didn't move. The dog flinched backward, a low whine escaping her throat. Her ears flattened as she crouched against the wall, paws splayed wide, eyes darting like cornered glass. She had seen this gesture before, not as kindness but as bait, hands that lured, then punished. She didn't trust the stillness, didn't trust the warmth she thought she glimpsed in the stranger's eyes. Trust was not a currency she carried anymore, and yet she didn't run. The stranger felt the tension pulling them apart inside, the rational voice whispering to let go, to walk away, that it was not their burden to carry. People had their own battles, rent to pay, work to wake up to, their own exhaustion pressing on their shoulders. Who was foolish enough to take in a creature with nothing to give back but need? Who would choose a road lined with sleepless nights, vet bills, patience stretched thin? But then the dog blinked, slow and heavy, as if every movement weighed something. Her ribs heaved with each ragged breath, her fur slick against her body, her tail tucked so tightly it nearly disappeared. She was more bone than flesh, a husk of what she might have once been. The sight of her hit the stranger in a place words couldn't quite reach, a quiet ache buried beneath the armor of daily survival. It was loneliness recognizing itself in another form. A car rode past, sending a sheet of dirty water across the pavement, splashing against the dog's paws. She startled violently, stumbling backward, almost collapsing into the wall. Her legs trembled but held, her chest pumping as panic surged. The stranger's hand clenched around the umbrella, torn between instinct and choice. Walk away. It would be so simple. Step back into the flood of anonymous faces. Return to the safety of four walls. Forget the image of her pressed against the brick like she was part of the city's refuse. But the image would not leave. It rooted itself, pressed into memory like ink into paper. The stranger lowered their hand, exhaling a shaky breath. They stepped back a pace, giving her space, letting the moment breathe. Maybe she needed to see that there was no trap here, no hidden hand waiting to strike. Maybe she needed to choose. And so they waited. The minutes stretched thin, stretched taut like a violin string quivering beneath a bow. Rain hammered against the umbrella, against their shoulders, filled the silence with 1,000 tiny sounds. The dog's eyes never left them, wide and gleaming, catching the fractured light of the street lamp. In that pause, the stranger remembered their own storms, the nights of loneliness, when silence filled every corner of their apartment and the hum of the refrigerator was the only proof they weren't the last person alive. They remembered what it felt like to walk unseen in the world, to pass through crowds like a shadow nobody bothered to catch. They remembered the sharp hunger of wishing someone, anyone, would notice, even for a heartbeat. And in the hollow of that memory, the decision tilted. They spoke, finally, though their voice was nearly lost beneath the rain. Just a whisper, no command, no plea, only a thread of sound meant for her ears alone. The dog stiffened at the sound, then tilted her head, water dripping from the tips of her ears. The stranger crouched slowly, lowering themselves to the ground, knees soaking in the puddles. The umbrella wobbled, then collapsed against their side, letting the rain fall freely on their shoulders. They didn't care anymore. Let the storm soak through. Maybe it was supposed to. The dog inched forward, one paw lifted, then froze midair. She licked her lips nervously, eyes darting from the stranger's face to their hand, as though weighing the invisible scales of survival. She took a trembling step closer, then stopped again, her claws clicking faintly against the pavement. The stranger's chest ached with the fragile beauty of it. They wanted to reach to bridge the distance, but they held still, letting her pace dictate the rhythm. Trust wasn't given, it was earned, carved slowly, gently through patience. A gust of wind rattled the street lamp above them, sending droplets cascading from its glass cover. The dog startled again, but this time she didn't retreat. She crouched lower, body tense, but her paw remained where it was, just a few feet away from the outstretched hand. And then it happened. Not a leap, not a rush, just the smallest shift. She lowered her head, stretched her nose forward, and breathed in the scent of the stranger's skin. Rain dripped from her muzzle, soaking the hand she sniffed. Her whiskers brushed lightly against their knuckles before she pulled back again, wary, uncertain. It was nothing. It was everything. The stranger closed their eyes, relief rushing through like a current. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the pause before it, the tiny spark in the dark. The dog had not run. She had chosen to linger, and that choice cracked something wide open inside them both. The storm raged on, but within its roar there was a new kind of silence, fragile, tentative, yet alive. Two beings beneath a street lamp, a pause in the storm, and the faintest hint of a bridge beginning to form. The rain had eased to a persistent drizzle, a fine mist that clung to the city like a soft veil. Streetlights reflected in puddles, shimmering golden in the damp dark. The dog stood frozen, just a few steps from the stranger, muscles taut, tail tucked like a secret. Every instinct screamed to run, but something, maybe the quiet patience, maybe the warmth in those eyes, kept her rooted. The stranger knelt fully now, one knee pressed against the slick pavement, offering a slow, steady hand. Their breathing had settled into a gentle rhythm, deliberately calm. They did not rush. They did not make sudden movements. The storm had passed, leaving behind the sharp smell of wet asphalt and the faint tang of rain-soaked leaves. The city's usual clamor had dulled to distant hums and car tires cutting through shallow pools. In the silence between heartbeats, the dog's ragged breaths sounded impossibly loud, a fragile drum that marked the fragile truce forming between them. She inched closer, paw tentatively lifted, pressed down, then lifted again. Each step was a negotiation, each movement a test of the stranger's resolve. They whispered her name softly, though they weren't sure she even understood it. Their voice was low, melodic, a thread of sound meant to soothe rather than command. The dog flinched at the first syllable, but the sound lingered, unwavering. A gust of wind whipped through the alley, carrying the scent of garbage and rain, causing the dog to shiver violently. She crouched, ears flat, eyes darting. The stranger stretched a hand slowly, palm open, and let her decide. A fraction of hesitation passed, then, with painstaking caution, she lifted her head and sniffed the offered hand. Wet fur brushed against fingertips, and for a heartbeat, the world held its breath. She recoiled slightly, startled by the warmth, by the unexpected gentleness. Her muscles trembled, tail flicking nervously. But the hand stayed, patient, unwavering. It was as if the stranger had frozen themselves in the rain, offering only presence, only constancy, a promise of no harm. Slowly, inch by inch, she pressed closer, nose brushing knuckles, eyes flicking up for a signal, a cue, a hint of safety. The stranger exhaled softly, relief washing through their chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. They knew the fragile nature of trust. It could break with a single misstep, vanish in an instant. So they stayed still, letting the dog explore, letting her dictate the pace. She sniffed, circled, retreated slightly, then returned again. Every small advance was a victory, each hesitant glance a whisper of courage. Hours seemed to pass in that quiet ritual. Rain pattered against the pavement, dripping from eaves and streetlights, filling the silence with soft, rhythmic percussion. The dog's breathing slowed, muscles relaxing fractionally. Her eyes, once wide and fearful, now held a glimmer of curiosity, a spark of recognition that maybe, just maybe, this stranger meant no harm. The stranger shifted slightly, pulling a small cloth from their coat pocket, dampening it with rainwater. They held it out, letting her sniff, let her know there was a place she could come without threat. The dog hesitated, pawing at the puddle nervously, then cautiously touched the cloth with her nose. She recoiled, then repeated the motion, sniffing more thoroughly. The stranger murmured reassurances, their tone soft, almost reverent, as though they were speaking to something sacred. Slowly, she allowed herself to brush closer, head grazing the outstretched hand, whiskers wet against skin. Each contact was a fragile promise, a tentative thread connecting two lives suspended on the edge of a storm. The stranger felt the weight of it, the miracle of small steps, the slow unraveling of fear. It was a trust so fragile that even the sound of a passing car or a clap of distant thunder could shatter it. And yet, she stayed. Time lost its meaning. Moments became measured only by subtle shifts, the flick of an ear, the soft exhalation of breath, the faint relaxation of paws pressed against puddled pavement. The stranger spoke softly about the night, about nothing at all, just enough to fill the space between them with calm, patient air. Her tail twitched, then lifted slightly, a tremulous signal that she was beginning to let go. A sharp crack of distant thunder startled her. She jumped, pressed low against the stranger's side, seeking anchor, safety. The stranger froze with her, hand still extended, heart tight with the intensity of her fear. Minutes passed. She trembled, then slowly, with painstaking courage, lifted her head and nudged her nose into their palm again. That night, beneath the drizzle and fading streetlight, a bond began to form. Not bold, not sudden, but fragile and luminous. The stranger realized that trust is a delicate negotiation, a language without words. And for the dog, this stranger was a lifeline, a promise that maybe the world could hold more than danger, more than hunger and cold. The city pulsed around them, unaware of the quiet miracle occurring on a patch of wet pavement. Cars sped by, distant voices called to each other across alleyways, neon signs flickered. And yet, in that small, soaked circle beneath the lamplight, time seemed to slow. The dog, trembling but tethered to a new reality, took her first small steps toward hope, and the stranger, chest tight with emotion, understood the weight of what they had begun. One decision, one small act of patience, had opened the door to a new life, one that neither of them could yet imagine fully, but both were beginning to walk toward. It was not a rescue, not yet, not fully. But it was the fragile, trembling first thread of something larger, a bridge of trust that, once crossed, might carry them both into a future neither had dared to dream of. The rain lightened further, almost hesitant, like it too was waiting to see what would happen next. And beneath that soft drizzle, with wet fur brushing against hands and eyes meeting in silent acknowledgement, the stranger and the dog remained, suspended in the delicate, trembling beauty of fragile trust. By the time they reached the stranger's apartment, the rain had dwindled to a soft mist, leaving the city slick and glistening. The dog's paws left faint wet prints along the floor as she tentatively explored the small space, her ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint whistle of the heater, the soft thrum of the stranger's heartbeat. She crouched low, muscles coiled, eyes wide with mistrust. But something in the stranger's posture, the way they moved slowly, deliberately, gave her a hint of safety. The stranger knelt again, hand extended, palm open. They whispered soothing words, soft and melodic, careful not to startle her. They offered a clean towel, patting it gently against the dog's fur, drying her with tender precision. Every motion was deliberate, patient, a promise without words that she was no longer alone. The dog flinched the first few times, then gradually leaned into the warmth, pressing her head lightly against their hands. Her ribs were painfully pronounced, her fur matted with grime and rain, but beneath it all, there was life, fragile, trembling, but undeniably there. The stranger wrapped a soft blanket around her, letting her nestle inside. She shivered, but not entirely from cold. There was a lingering tremor of fear that had yet to dissipate. The stranger sat nearby, watching, their presence steady, a silent guardian. They murmured gentle reassurances, talking not just to her but to themselves, their own loneliness spilling into the quiet room. It was strange, they realized, how two broken souls could find solace in the mere act of existing in the same space, sharing warmth and breath, offering each other the kind of silent understanding the world rarely grants. A shallow sound came from her throat, a tentative growl, half a whine, half a hum, and the stranger froze heart tight, not out of fear but awe. It was the sound of something stirring, the first thread of trust stretching fragilely across the divide. They didn't move quickly, didn't try to coax her, simply let her express herself, small gestures of identity and resistance. Slowly, ever so slowly, she shifted, curling closer, resting her head against the stranger's knee, eyes softening for just a fleeting moment. They prepared a small bowl of water and some carefully portioned food. She approached cautiously, paws pressing against the floor as though it were a different world, sniffing at the bowl before retreating. The stranger stayed still, letting her explore, letting her assert her pace. Hunger finally overcame hesitation, and she began to eat, delicate bites at first, then greedier, until her ribs moved beneath the thin coat with a little more ease. The stranger's chest swelled with relief, but they knew this was only the beginning. Healing was not instantaneous. Hours stretched on. The dog lay beside the blanket, still trembling, still cautious, but she allowed herself to rest. The stranger sat quietly, whispering stories of ordinary days, of sunlight spilling across floors, of small joys the dog could not yet imagine. Each word was a thread weaving a tapestry of safety around her. Each breath shared a silent promise: you are no longer alone. Outside, the city continued its ceaseless rhythm, cars slicing through wet streets, distant sirens piercing the night, the soft whisper of wind through buildings. Inside, time slowed, marked by the rhythm of mutual presence. The stranger's hand brushed lightly across her back, careful not to startle, gentle reassurances for every tremor, every sudden shift of the ears. Slowly, the dog began to relax, her tail flicking hesitantly, then curling slightly around her own body. It was a small victory, a fragile signal that healing had begun. At some point, she rose, pacing the small apartment carefully, sniffing at corners, investigating shadows. The stranger followed, softly giving her space, allowing her to set the boundaries. She pressed her nose to the floor, to the couch, to the stranger's shoes, marking a new territory, one that might one day feel like home. She returned to the blanket again, laying her head gently against the stranger's hand, sighing. A long, shuddering exhale, a release of tension held too long. The night wore on, and the stranger found themselves silently marveling at the fragile resilience before them. The dog had survived streets that would have crushed a less determined heart. She had endured hunger, cold, indifference, yet here she was, trembling but alive, beginning to accept the notion that safety was possible. The stranger felt their own heart begin to open in ways long closed off. They had chosen to intervene, and in doing so, had become tethered to something greater than themselves. A life waiting for them both to nurture it. Hours became minutes. Minutes became moments suspended in quiet understanding. The dog rested at last, head pressed against the stranger's knee, eyes closing in a tentative trust. The stranger brushed their fingers lightly through her fur, feeling the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the soft rhythm of life returning. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind a city washed clean, streets glinting in the early hints of dawn. It was not a miraculous transformation, not yet. Fear still lingered in the twitch of an ear, in the hesitant steps of a paw, but trust, that most delicate of bonds, had been planted. It would take time, patience, and countless quiet nights like this for it to bloom fully. And yet, even in the fragile pause of early morning, there was a promise as a life once adrift had found an anchor, and two hearts, one human, one canine, had begun to heal together. The stranger leaned back against the wall, exhausted but elated, watching her chest rise and fall, counting each slow, steady breath. In the hush of the night, with rain-streaked windows and the soft scent of wet concrete lingering in the air, they realized something simple yet profound. Rescue is not just about saving a life. It is about opening your own heart to be changed forever. And for the first time in a long time, they believed in beginnings. Sunlight broke over the city in golden slivers, slipping between buildings and glinting off puddles left from the night's rain. The streets were quiet now, washed clean and soft under the morning haze. Inside the apartment, the dog stirred, stretching her limbs carefully, tail flicking with a tentative joy. The stranger watched her, heart tight with something like awe, as she moved with a new fluidity, muscles no longer sharp with hunger or fatigue. She was still small, still delicate in her bones, but there was life in her steps. Life that hadn't existed on those wet streets before. She padded to the door, sniffing at the threshold as if testing the world beyond. The stranger knelt, extending a hand, but this time she didn't hesitate. Her nose nudged it, then, in a gesture that spoke of confidence and trust, she brushed against their legs, tail wagging softly. It was a language of gratitude, of acknowledgement, a silent promise that the connection they had forged in rain and uncertainty was real, unbreakable. They walked together into the morning. The streets, now bathed in soft sunlight, seemed less threatening, less anonymous. Pigeons scattered in the wake of their steps, the smell of damp leaves rising from cracks in the sidewalks, and somewhere a child laughed, ringing across the street. The dog paused, sniffing at a patch of grass, rolling briefly in the morning dew, eyes bright with curiosity and wonder. Each moment was a revelation: the taste of fresh air, the warmth of the sun on her back, the steady presence of a hand that would not harm, would not abandon. The stranger let her take the lead, letting her explore, knowing that trust once given must be nurtured, not forced. She turned occasionally, eyes meeting theirs, seeking reassurance, and finding it in the gentle smile, in the quiet laughter that escaped their lips, in the soft words spoken just for her. In that shared rhythm of movement and silence, a bond was cemented, no longer fragile, no longer tentative. They found a small park, the grass still wet from the morning mist. The dog bounded forward for the first time, paws sinking into the soft earth, ears perked, tail high. She sniffed the flowers, chased a fluttering leaf, and when she turned back, she found the stranger waiting, hands extended, full of patience and love. She approached, brushing against them, chest heaving with excitement, eyes glinting with life renewed. The city around them seemed to fade, a distant murmur behind the clarity of this new world they shared. The stranger knelt again, fingers lightly combing through her fur, tracing the soft ridges of muscle now thriving beneath her coat. Every scar, every tremor, every memory of the streets they had left behind whispered through her movements. But now, those marks were tempered by warmth, safety, and companionship. She leaned into the touch, no longer fearful, no longer tentative, her eyes calm and trusting. They paused on a bench, letting the morning seep into their bones. Sunlight filtered through branches, dappling the dog's coat, making it gleam in shades of gold and brown. The stranger reached into their pocket and pulled out a small treat, offering it gently. She took it, careful at first, then with the eagerness of one who knows that kindness exists in this world. The gesture, simple as it was, became a shared language, a testament to patience, perseverance, and the quiet power of human compassion. As they sat together, the stranger reflected on the journey that had begun with rain, fear, and hesitation. How easy it would have been to look away, to let the shadows slip back into the city's indifference. And yet, one small act, a hand extended in patience, a heart open to change, had transformed both of them. The dog, once lost and adrift, now moved with a newfound confidence, exploring her world with curiosity and trust. The stranger, in turn, had opened their own heart, discovering that saving a life often means allowing yourself to be saved in return. They rose, walking slowly through the park, the city awakening around them. The dog ran ahead, then returned, brushing against legs, ears perked in joyous attention. Sunlight warmed her fur, the scent of earth and dew mingling with the faint memory of the streets she had survived. Every step was a testament to resilience, to the beauty of second chances, to the quiet miracles that unfold when empathy meets courage. As they rounded a corner, the stranger paused, letting her explore a patch of wildflowers growing along the sidewalk. She sniffed at each bloom, tail high, eyes bright, and then turned to look at them. An almost imperceptible tilt of the head that said, "I am here. I am safe. I am home." The stranger knelt beside her, brushing the morning dew from her fur, and whispered softly, "You belong. You're not alone anymore." She pressed close, body warm and steady beneath their hands, and for a long moment, the world held still around them. There was no past pain, no hunger, no fear, only the gentle certainty of connection, of life reclaimed, of a bond forged in quiet courage. They walked on together, step by step, sun climbing higher in the sky. The city, once harsh and indifferent, now seemed softened, alive with possibility. And in the simple rhythm of their steps, the dog and the stranger became more than survivor and savior. They became companions, co-authors of a new story, a life rewritten in warmth, trust, and unwavering love. At last, they reached a quiet street where golden light pooled on the pavement. The dog paused, turning to look at the stranger, eyes shining, tail wagging freely. The stranger smiled, brushing their fingers along her spine, feeling the steady beat of a life transformed. They had walked together from rain and fear into sunlight and hope. And in that luminous morning, there was a sense of finality, of completeness, of a chapter closed in the best possible way. The dog bounded ahead one last time, chasing a leaf swirling in the breeze. She returned to the stranger, pressing against them, eyes full of recognition, gratitude, and joy. The stranger laughed softly, tears brimming, feeling the unspoken truth. A single decision, made in the rain, had created an entire lifetime of love. And as the sunlight bathed them both, the stranger realized that this was more than a rescue. It was a beginning. A forever morning, where two lives once lonely and fractured, now walked forward together, unafraid, unbroken, and infinitely alive. The city hummed around them, indifferent yet brilliant. But for the dog and the stranger, nothing else existed in that golden light. Only the gentle warmth of home, of trust, and the boundless promise of all the mornings yet to come.